Tucker Carlson's camel coverage. Just stay tuned. That's all I'm saying. We have an amazing panel here to break down all of this week's top stories. Charlie Hurt is with us, along with Madison Giussiotto, Gianno Caldwell, and Teslin Figueroa. But first, Davos, elitism, and the populist revolution. President Trump went to Davos this week and did exactly what every American would want him to do: promote the USA and urge international businesses to invest here so we get more jobs and higher living standards for American workers. The president was diplomatically polite. Good for him. But here's what you really need to know about Davos. It's the event where white billionaires fly in on their private jets to pontificate about diversity, inequality, and climate change, where the world's biggest corporations throw lavish parties to bribe corrupt and supine journalists into reporting that those corporations really care about the social and environmental problems that they cause in the first place. It's where the bankers, bureaucrats, technocrats and plutocrats slap each other on the back as they congratulate themselves on being the people who really run the world. The absurdity, hypocrisy and sheer time and money-wasting futility of Davos knows no bounds, appropriately enough, for what the self-appointed guardians of globalism have turned into the world's most smug group hug. Davos represents almost everything that's wrong with the world. Everything that the populist revolution should be aiming to overthrow. Davos represents open borders when we need strong nation states. When we need real people power to help the unprotected, Davos represents the centralization of power in the hands of the unelected. And above all, Davos represents rule by the rich, a disgusting, corrupt oligarchy that for decades pushed an elitist policy agenda, regardless of which party has won actual elections, that made the rich richer and working people poorer. Brexit, Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, election results in Germany and Austria, and just this weekend in the Czech Republic, independence movements like the one in Catalonia, Spain. These are all signs that people are rejecting elitism and its failures. So what next? Well, President Trump needs to continue with his pro-worker economic agenda. We're already seeing new jobs and higher incomes as a direct result of less regulation and lower taxes. Now, we need a deal to limit low-wage immigration. And in next week's State of the Union, I hope we'll see a strong plan for infrastructure too. We need more tough action to make trade fair, as we saw this week with new tariffs in key sectors. In particular, we need to confront and defeat China. But beyond that, we need a real assault on the power and privileges of our corrupt ruling elite. Break up big businesses so we get real competitive markets. Drain the swamp in Washington, D.C. and state capitals. Take power from the federal government and put it back in the hands of the people. That is the next revolution we need. Please tell me what you think. Follow us on Twitter and have your say at Steve Hilton X and at NextRevFNC. Now let's bring in our panel. Madison Giussiotto, a member of President Trump's campaign advisory board. Fox News political analyst Gianno Caldwell, former Bernie Sanders national staffer Teslin Figueroa, and here he is, Washington Times opinion editor and Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt. Great to see you. Well, Madison, I'm going to start with you. How do you think it's going in terms of the delivery of that assault on the elite that the 2016 election was all about? Davos is really the opposite of what President Trump campaigned on. How do you feel it's going so far?
Right, and you know, when we look at how President Trump handled his trip to Davos, I don't think this was by accident. When he got there, he did an amazing interview with CNBC talking about the fact that he was not going into Davos thinking about elitism or globalism, but he was approaching this with money, jobs, and investment in mind. And so he had the right idea all along. When we look at his speech, it was positive, and it focused on inviting the world to invest in America. And just a year ago, a lot of the numbers that we're seeing today were laughable to many people, not only just in the United States, but across the world. And so he's really kind of capitalized on the idea of running this government like a business and stopping the same old mistakes that so many U.S. leaders before him have made. And so he's done an incredible job with our economy. And I think he really capitalized on the idea of investment in our economy from other countries and other business leaders. I agree with that.
I think that's a great point. I think that's his role, you know, to try and promote the USA. But Charlie, but underlying that, do you think that there was a danger that he was a bit too cozy with them?
I don't know. I don't think anybody's ever going to accuse him of being sort of the Davos elite. So I don't think that there's a real danger of that. But I do think that, and we saw this when he gave his inaugural address. and he came out and he basically took everything he said during his the campaign and said it again on the Mall in front of Congress, and Washington flipped out, and they said, "Wait a minute, that's not how we do it around here. We run campaigns, and then we go into government and we do the same thing that the previous administration did."
That's exactly right. It's been going on for so long.
Yeah, and so what I found so refreshing about it, and I think this is why I guess that I don't see a particular danger of him appearing to be too cozy, is that he went out there and he basically did the same thing. It could have been, parts of it could have been a campaign speech. The way he laid out his vision and what he wanted, and it's very clear. He's very good at using very clear, simple language to make his points, and people, especially fancy people who go to places like Davos, that's their biggest failing. They've forgotten to understand simple is better. Small words are better.
I
Just
totally
make the
agree,
point.
and that's one of the reasons I think that the elite are so sort of snooty about President Trump, because he actually talks in really simple language that people can understand. Tessin, one of the things I thought was interesting was that when you listen to what the president said about trade in his Davos speech, it was almost exactly the same as what you'd. Let's just imagine that we're in a world of President Sanders, as you wanted to see from the 2016 campaign, and he was there in Davos representing America. On trade, it was pretty much the same message. We're done with these big sort of bureaucratic deals, and it's all about what's in the interest of the American worker, and particularly this word that President Trump says over and over again, reciprocal. If you treat us fairly, we'll treat you fairly. So you must have liked that.
Well, I mean, of course, I didn't know if you were talking about the DNC convention or the RNC convention when you were reading, the summary of Davos, because to me that sounds like both conventions, attending both of them. But when we talk about trade and how important it is, I think people across the board, me as a former employer, I had 300 employees myself, lost my business due to healthcare reform. So I think everyone agrees, that it's important to invest, in America, but then it comes down to the reciprocal. What is the benefit from it? So it's no surprise that a billionaire, very successful, guy in business like Trump didn't get up and speak about business and the importance of investment and speaking into terms that they can understand. But like you said, the hypocrisy of it all. Can you really play both sides of it, and how does it fare well? And I think the people that have elected Trump feel comfortable enough to say, to agree with him and saying, hey, it's nothing wrong with putting America first. We want to invest. You get something, we get something, but we will be putting America first, just as you should your country.
I think that's right. That's one of the things that was attractive to a lot of people about the Trump campaign and the message. Very sort of pragmatic and practical, not ideological, like they'd heard from a lot of Republicans over the years.
Yeah, that's very true. And I think for some, it's unusual, especially to be successful as a candidate and then win office for the highest office in the land, being president. President Trump, this past year, talk about 2016, 2017, it's been an extremely successful year. There's been a lot of bumps in the road, though. But in terms of going over to Davos and talking about what has happened in terms of our economy, $7 trillion added to our economy, unemployment at an all-time low for a number of groups, including African Americans, and the fact that this tax reform, if with all the businesses we're seeing investing into our economy, we may get 4% growth. Therefore, tax reform actually paid for. He has a lot to be proud of in terms of that, and going there and saying, hey, we got an economy that you want to invest in. I think what's particularly necessary for him is to stay on message continuously beyond just a successful trip and a successful speech. Having to continue to do that post the trip and continue to invite businesses in. And that's one of the hardest parts that we continue to see throughout Trump's throws everything off in the media narrative.
The next big thing is the State of the Union. What are you looking forward to from that?
I think that what we saw in Davos is kind of a precursor to what we will see at the State of the Union. He does have a lot to be proud of, and he does have a lot to go out there and point to. And I also think that because he does sort of, he likes to paint in broad brushes, and he has a vision that's kind of a broad brush vision, I suspect he's going to bring up some new things that maybe we've never even heard of about things he wants to get accomplished. And I know we're going to talk about this later on, but take immigration, for example.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, we really are going to talk about that later on, so I don't want to get into it now. But I just wanted to, Madison, just what are you looking forward to?
You know, I wish he had a longer speech because I think there's so many incredible things that he's done over the past year that he could talk about. Some of the things I definitely expect that he will hit on.
Forward-looking, though, not just sort of...
Right, right. Of course it'll be forward-looking, but I think some of the things have to do with what's happened over the past year and where we're going to continue to see these places go, see these numbers rise. When we look at the economy, we look at consumer confidence at a 17-year high. We look at unemployment at a 17-year low, and I think these numbers are going to continue to rise, and these are things that he's going to speak on because they're important to Americans of all ages. This is why people voted for him, and I think it's why they're going to vote for him again in 2020.
Well, will he just speak on the numbers, or will he also, I mean, I wouldn't say it's been extremely successful, you know, maybe on the finance side, but are we going to address, you know, some of the soft issues as well? That's what I'm looking for. Are we just going to completely ignore it?
What other issues?
Hang on, one at a time. People. That's the most important part economically for a lot of people.
But people vote on their heart as well. So I'm just curious, you're just going to brush over and act like nothing happened.
But keep in mind, Trump supporters and regular GOP folks that went out and vote, they're probably going to vote again for him in record numbers.
Right.
So the heart issues is another thing.
Well, and what he's...
I think it does depend on the results. And I think that if he keeps delivering real substantial things like the tax reform, that's why I talked about infrastructure, then I think that because that creates jobs and productivity growth, that means higher incomes. That's what people are looking for. Anyway, let's leave it there for the moment. Thanks, thanks all of you. Coming up, I'll be taking on top never Trumper David Frum over his new book that claims, quote, "We are living through the most dangerous challenge to the free government of the United States that anyone alive has encountered." But next, Newt Gingrich on whether the Trump administration is making progress on its pledge to drain the swamp. Don't miss that. One year into the Trump presidency, how are we doing on one of the most high-profile promises of Donald Trump's campaign, draining the swamp? Earlier, I had the chance to ask former Speaker of the House and Fox News political analyst Newt Gingrich. Take a look. Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited. Your first time on the show. It's wonderful for you to be able to join us. I wanted to talk to you about one of the biggest promises that people got excited about that Donald Trump made in the campaign. I know it's something that you are so expert in. Drain the swamp. 1 year on, how are we doing in terms of draining the swamp? What's your take?
Well, I think the different parts of the swamp are getting drained at a different rate. He is clearly the greatest deregulation president in history. The number of pages of regulation that they have ripped up exceed everything Reagan did in 8 solid years. It's an amazing achievement for his first year, and I think it's had a big effect on the economy. He clearly has begun to move on judges. You'd have to say that he has had more appeals court judges approved, 12 in 1 year, than any president in his first year in the history of the appeals court, going back to 1891. So you have to give him very high marks there. The tax cut moves power out of Washington in a huge way. So I would say I'd probably give him a 65 or 70% achievement rate in a very, very tough business. Remember, the city is trying to stop him every morning, and he continues to plow forward.
And so some of the things that, some of the specific, I'm just looking at the contract with the American voter that he put out during the campaign, and some of them very specific things that have been met. As you mentioned, the regulations, 2 out for every 1 in, the lobbying ban, that's all been done. But there are some things that were spoken about that actually looks like they haven't quite been met yet, and I just wanted to know what you thought of them in terms of priorities. Specifically on the lobbying, they've been able to clamp down on those people who work for the White House or for government agencies from working in lobbying after they leave, but not for Congress, which is something that they promised. Is the White House even able to regulate the behavior of Congress and congressional aides in that way, or is that something that's going to have to be addressed by Congress itself?
Well, look, I think the president's role is to say to the country, call your congressmen, call your senators, but ultimately they've got to make the decisions, and that's how our system operates. So there are some things he can't get done. He couldn't get Obamacare repealed, although they came very, very close. So what he's been doing is systematically, methodically taking it apart at every level where he can administratively. And he has dramatically reduced the importance of Obama's efforts to create a national health system. I think you have to look at what can he do by executive action and what takes Congress. And frankly, as long as you have a 51-49 majority in the Senate, you don't have real control because it takes 60 votes. So it's a very uphill fight for the things that require legislative action.
And do you think that there's any prospect of doing something really radical? One of the things that we talk about a lot on this show is that one of the reasons that you have this vast swamp and there's so much lobbying and corruption that goes on is just because the federal government does so much, Congress does so much. And we're very excited about the prospect of transferring some of that power to the states and to local government. Do you think there's any chance of that happening? Is that something that you can see the administration turning to in the years ahead?
Well, they're already doing it. For example, on Medicaid, where they have the authority, they're transferring decision power back to the 50 states in a very big on reforming welfare, having a work requirement. They've already given a approval to Kansas, to Maine, and now to Kentucky. So there are a number of places where they're shifting power back at the Environmental Protection Agency. They're shifting power back to the states at the Department of the Interior. They're shifting power back to local communities. It's not a perfect story, and frankly, you know, if you take a system the size and complexity of the United States, it's very hard to turn on a dime. I think Trump has represented a greater domestic change than any president in my lifetime, greater even than Reagan. And I think that if he has 2 or 3 more years of building momentum, he will have achieved an enormous amount in his first term.
I think what's really coming out is how much is being done that isn't being reported and people aren't even aware of in terms of the scale of the changes. Just in the short time we have left, what do you think you would prioritize in the next year?
Well, I think he's got to do a couple of things in this coming year. He's got to have some kind of very substantial reform of the immigration system, some kind of an agreement that includes control of the southern border, includes sanctuary cities, as well as solving the problem of the Dreamers. That's going to be, I think, one of the most important negotiations. He's got to build, I think, some kind of infrastructure bill that really moves us back to being competitive with a modern infrastructure system. Ours has really decayed dramatically in the last 20 or 25 years. I think he's got to continue to rebuild the military. He's a long way from completed the job of rebuilding our military. So he's got some pretty big challenges between now and the election.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much. Fantastic insights. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us, and see you soon.
Good to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
And next, immigration. Is there going to be a deal? We will break it down for you. That's right ahead. This week, the White House put forward an immigration plan that will give citizenship to nearly 2 million illegal immigrants in exchange for funding the wall, ending the visa lottery, and shifting to a merit-based system. Everyone seemed to hate it. So what does that mean for the chances of something actually happening? Tesla, I want to get your reaction particularly on this, because it seems to me that in this whole conversation about immigration, which has focused most recently on the DACA issue, the point I've been making over and over again is that the Democrats don't really care about the DACA recipients, because they seem to object to everything, whatever deal is put in front of them. And it used to be, well, we can't do the deal if it involves the wall because we don't want the stupid wall. And now that this new proposal has been put forward, they're saying, well, fine, you can have the wall, but we really hate this point about reducing legal immigration. That seems to be the new argument from the left. And we got an example of that just from today. I just want to play a clip for our audience and just get you to react in a second.
A lot of immigration advocates who believe that the permanent changes are just too much of a price to pay.
Well, they're a huge price to pay. It would affect legal immigration, which is not something that there's any kind of consensus that needs to be changed. The principle of family reunification is something that's enormously popular in this country.
So she's saying there, and I think that really accurately represents where the left is right now, that there's no consensus on reducing legal immigration. That is absolutely not true. Just look at this poll that from, I think it was last week. I think we can put it on screen. Huge numbers. Look at that. 81% want to reduce immigration from the current level. 63% want to cut it by at least a half. And only 19% want to increase it. So this argument from the left that there's no support for reducing legal immigration. It's just not true.
I would say that, what people are feeling is this: people are being played for a pawn. To come out and say no deal or else, and then only to fold like a napkin, within a 48, 72-hour period, starts to make people kind of wonder, is this really about, passing the best, option for the Dreamers, or is this just more about pandering to voters that you'll need in 2018? And I just want to go ahead and be honest and say that I know no one wants to say it because it seems to, hurt people's feelings, but the reality of it is, one of the questions I pose is, will the government shut down for African American issues? Is there ever going to be, a do this or else for issues that have been concerned in my community for those who were actually born in this country, lived in this country, served in the military like myself? So there's a lot of resentment that we'll continue to see go around this issue, and it won't just stop just with DACA.
Do we have to see things in that kind of, in that way, in terms of separate groups? Can't we agree that actually there are certain things that would benefit everyone together, particularly in terms of economic growth and so on? I don't like that way of thinking about it, but I just want to stick to the immigration deal, because that's what's in front of us. I mean, a lot of people, look, Ann Coulter, I think was in the vanguard of saying this is a total sellout, this deal. So you've got the right hating it and the left.
Yeah, and personally, I don't like it either. But I will say this, having covered this issue on Capitol Hill for 15 years and studied it much farther back than that, this is the most centrist proposal any politician in Washington has ever proposed to fix this problem.
But, sorry, do you mean that as a compliment or not?
I don't. No, I mean I don't mean it as a compliment simply because it's not the deal that I would go with. It's not what I would like. But what I mean is, the guy, this is a serious guy making a serious offer. He's looked at all of the options on the table and said, and even with the campaign that he ran, he said, listen, I can tell you, this is the center right here. And he's right. That's where the center is. Yes. And nobody likes it. And this is why, a big reason why I think that the truth of the matter is, Democrats don't want to make a deal on this. They like the issue. They don't want to fix it. And back to the important point you made about
to keep that open as a campaiging issue.
Absolutely. As long as the wound is open, then they can punch at it every election and get people to show up. And I think the very important point you made about the DACA recipients, do they care about the DACA kids?
Yeah.
I can tell you this. If they actually cared about the DACA kids, what would be the first thing you would do? The first thing you would do is maybe grant them legalization or whatever, but then you'd make sure that we didn't create another generation of DACA kids. Mm-hmm. And the only way you do that is through security. And they refuse to do any of that. So that tells me that that they care more about the issue than they do the actual individual.
I think that's right. And you did, to me, the example of that was Nancy Pelosi's almost insane response to this.
No.
I literally couldn't. She's such a divisive politician, and to go on, what was she talking about? This is about making America white again. It was really. I know we're used to her being ridiculous, but it was so over the top, even for her.
It's appalling. It's disrespectful. So many people in this country felt that they had been forgotten and they haven't been put first. A lot of issues they were concerned about, immigration being one for decades, have not been solved by politicians in Washington. We finally have someone, like Charlie said, who's coming forward with a centrist plan that should please everyone in a lot of ways.
Do you think that
and no one's happy with even the effort he's made on this, because this is a problem that needs solved. We can't address border security and not address DACA. We can't not address DACA and address, one thing or another. We need to address all of these things, and I think he's making an effort to do that, and people aren't giving him really enough credit on this, because I think his plan is better than many are saying.
And do you think his core supporters will accept it?
Yeah, I do. I've talked to a lot of people across this country, a lot of people involved and not involved, and people have been receptive to the idea.
I think, so to Madison's point, I believe his core supporters will accept it for a couple different reasons. One of which was his tweet recently, which he said, hey, I'm giving Democrats the option, and they really want to keep the campaign issue alive. So they see it as a strategic movement. On another point, and I have to go back to this. I know you said you want to keep it on immigration. But truthfully, we're both representatives of the African American community, obviously. And what's going on right now in the Democratic Party, who's in this fight, is African Americans are saying, hey, what about us? Why aren't you concerned about our issues? You're concerned about folks who aren't in this country legally. We've been here. We've been dealing with issues for 30 plus years of unemployment, violence in our community, etc. But you're willing to focus more on this group than us, which is causing infighting within the Democratic Party.
For sure, and I know you said you don't like it, but I didn't like when I found out the tooth fairy wasn't real. But the reality is the tooth fairy wasn't real. So it sounds good to say, oh, let's solve a utopia. But when you talk about Trump core supporters, who are Trump's core supporters? The majority are white. I mean, it's okay for us to have different opinions and different issues and different needs. We can find center issues, but it is important to recognize whether people like identity politics or not. And DACA is identity politics at the highest level, but you're forgetting about other identities, white identities, black identities, other identities that have
the connection that I would make is that actually, if you look at, I mean, I completely agree, and we've made the point on this show before, you know, if you look at sort of black incomes compared to white incomes, asset ownership and so on, there's so many issues, examples of the point you're making. But the sort of mass low-wage immigration has hurt black people more than white people.
Again,
so that's the connection with the
gives
issue.
gravitas to the issue. Now, in terms of the immigration plan that President Trump proposed, I disagree with a couple of my colleagues. I thought it was, I give him credit for getting involved, but I thought it was generously a liberal plan. I don't see why
the
you
Trump
would give,
plan.
Yes, I thought it was a very liberal plan. I don't see why he would propose something like that. It didn't make a lot of sense.
Well, it's a perennial issue. I'm sorry we're out of time to talk about it now, but we will, you know, I think this is, if he can get this done this year, what an incredible accomplishment that will be, and I hope he can. Coming up, David Frum believes that Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. He's written a book about it called Trumpocracy, The Corruption of the American Republic. Why does he think that? We'll find out next. Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. I suspect we're going to disagree quite a bit, but you've gone to the trouble of writing this book, so why don't you lay out for us your argument and then we'll get into it.
Trumpocracy is not a study of the president's personality. Trumpocracy is a study of Donald Trump's power, how he has built a system that protects him as he helps himself to millions of dollars of payments from abroad, and protects him as he does business with foreign powers, as particularly his dangerous collusion with Russia and its intervention in the last election. In this, Donald Trump pays for this by delivering traditional Republican elites what they want, mostly big tax cuts. They give him protection. The whole system of power includes Republicans in Congress, the mega donors, and I'm sorry to say it includes this network, which plays such a sinister part in Donald Trump's power.
Well, I think that, you know, let's just take those things one by one. I mean, first of all, the collusion point has been repeatedly made but not proven. I'm interested what your point about, so let's not get into that, because let's just sort of wait and see that process get to the end get to an outcome at the end of it. But you specifically about enriching himself personally, what are you referring to there?
Right now, Donald Trump is receiving literally millions of dollars of payments. We don't know how much because none of this money is disclosed, from business partners in the Philippines, in Turkey, United Arab Emirates, India, other countries where he has licensed his name. Those partners pay the Trump Organization. Donald Trump is the beneficial owner, has total control over it, millions of dollars a year, totally undisclosed. No one knows how much, and they have a huge influence over the foreign policy of the United States. That's why we're so soft on the Philippines and so soft on Turkey. Meanwhile, and it's so dramatic that the man in Manila, who is Donald Trump's business partner, who signs Donald Trump's check, is the Filipino ambassador to the United States. But we don't know how much money he owes. Donald Trump, it came to light by accident, owes the Bank of China $600 million in mortgages on a couple of office buildings in New York City. We learned that by accident. The extent of his debt is totally invisible.
But I think the point that where I sort of can't follow the argument is how this ends up affecting policy in a substantive and negative way. So hang on a second.
The leader of Turkey brought goons who beat up people in DuPont Circle in Washington, D.C. Donald Trump did nothing about that. And you have to ask the question, is the fact that he's getting millions of dollars in payment from Istanbul, where he has a business, and where his business partners have been literally arrested by the same guy who sent goons to beat up protesters in DuPont Circle, is that affecting American foreign policy? Is that why America's so soft on the Erdogan government? We don't know, because we don't know how much the president owes, but we know it's a lot.
Okay. Okay, but the point about the policy towards the Erdogan government, that's no change from what was there before. You're not arguing that Obama had some kind of personal financial relationship. It seems to me that when you have there's something about Donald Trump that just causes people to make these extreme comments that actually can't be justified.
In the Persian Gulf, there was a contretemps between Bahrain on the one side and Qatar on the other. The United States government and the State Department tried to make peace. Donald Trump took an instant stand against Qatar. Why? Well, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia had rented space in his hotel. Qatar had not. Qatar had a lease in the Trump Tower. They canceled it in 2014. He was very angry about it. So we don't know this is why he did it, but the network of corrupt business dealings, undisclosed, we find about the accident. This is the most financially involved president in American history, and there isn't a second compared to him.
Well, of course he's financially involved because he's a business person, and that's the new thing. But I just wanted to sort of broaden it out
a little bit. That is a new thing. That is never. It has never been allowed to before. That you carry on a business while you're president. That's considered. That's when you ask why is it such a shocking departure from the past? No, we've had rich presidents before. We've never had a president who's carried on a international private business as president without disclosure and while shutting down law enforcement investigation of it.
But trying to broaden this out into some kind of systemic assault on the democratic system, I think, is where the argument falls down. It seems to me that actually what you're seeing in the form of your book, frankly, and your arguments, and those of you who take that view, plus the courts and the media and the system of the constitutionally mandated processes in Washington and elsewhere, is a real resistance, to use that phrase, to what Donald Trump's trying to do. How can you claim that this is turning into some kind of unprecedented assault on our democracy?
Well, because I'm very clear about the nature of threats that come from modern authoritarians. We're not going back to the past and secret police and marching bands. We don't do that in the 21st century. The way when democracy fails, as it is failing in South Africa, as it's failing in India, as it has failed in Turkey, as it's failing in Poland and Hungary, it's done by increments. It's done in a much more economical way. So the president, as you say, I'm free to publish. That's true. It's also true that journalists in Washington have never encountered the level of physical threat they have from supporters of this president. It's not the state that intimidates journalists. It's the people that Donald Trump incites, like that poor deluded man who shot up the pizza parlor on Connecticut Avenue.
But hang on a second. Okay, the previous regime, the George W. Bush regime and the Obama regime, also threatened journalists they didn't like in using the law and other means. So I just think that. But there's a broader point I wanted to make, because it seems to me that when you. Hang on a second. When you see these arguments, that it feels to me like what you're really objecting to, and this is where I think it goes back to the 2016 election and the failures of the Republican Party for many, many years before that, as well as the Democrats and the elitist system, is that what you're really objecting to is not the substance of what this administration is doing, but the style of how it speaks and acts and behaves. And when real people in their real lives are looking at that and saying, well, why should I really care about that if he's actually doing things finally to turn around the economy, raise incomes, and so on. I think that's the part of this that comes over to me as very decadent in terms of these criticisms. But I just want to bring in
the economy is growing at exactly the same pace it's grown in the past 3 years. There's been no improvement of the economy under Donald Trump. It's the same as in 2014, 2015, and 2016.
Lots of gasps around the table. But let's just start with Charlie.
So David, I've not read your whole book, but I was interested in this one accusation you made in it, where you said Trump is one by one disabling the federal government's inhibitions against corruption. And one of the arguments that you use is the fact that he fired 46 U.S. attorneys when he first became president. As you know, that's not an unusual thing for a new administration to do.
I don't make that argument.
I'm sorry. That's not your argument? Well, let me ask you this. I
said exactly the opposite.
You don't criticize him?
What I said in the book, and I do recommend. No one has to read it, but they do have to read it before they talk about it.
I did just read it from the. Yeah.
Okay, so what I said was it's complete.
The line. Trump is one by one disabling.
Well, not
yes,
time,
that's true.
People get confused.
Okay,
Yeah.
what I said is it is quite normal.
You were in the Bush administration in 2006, and you remember, I think, when the Bush administration dismissed 7 U.S. attorneys in the middle of a term, which is highly, highly unusual, and amid accusations that they're doing
You're
it
bluffing.
As political punishment.
You're bluffing.
No, I'm not bluffing. I'm asking you, what is the difference? And would you say that
You're
George
bluffing.
W. Bush was one by one disabling those same things?
No one has to read the book, but they do have to read it before they tell me what I said. What I said was it is quite normal for administrations to replace U.S. attorneys when they come in. What is abnormal is the kind of personal interrogation of the incoming class that Donald Trump did. What is abnormal is to say it is the Trump Justice Department and to tell appointees that they owe personal loyalty to the president. President Obama correctly said
The same accusations that were made.
Don't interrupt.
What President Obama correctly said when he hired you as attorneys, I appointed you, but you do not work for me. Donald Trump has asked the acting director of the FBI how he voted. That is unconscionable.
Okay, David, you know, we could do a whole show discussing this. It would be so fun, but we don't have time. I just want to leave with you know, just because I know that you've actually, over the years, made real efforts to understand and and think about the failures of what I describe as the elitist policy agenda, and particularly how it's affected working people, working Americans. Is there anything in what's happened since the election in the last year that you can point to as being positive and something that you can support?
Look, you and I have talked about this in the past, and you're absolutely right. The ideas of the Republican Party up to 2016 were, as you say, they were decadent. They were out of date. They weren't helpful. We ignored the opioid epidemic. We didn't deal with immigration. We didn't deal with middle-class incomes. That was so important. And what is so tragic about what has happened to the party now is that Donald Trump stepped in and exploited all of these issues that were crying for real solution and used them to arrogate power for himself and his corruption. It is heartbreaking. I don't know when this chance will come again, and we have a real risk of the Republican Party sliding into ignominious defeat with none of the important issues that you care so much about being addressed.
I think that actually, you know, if we continue on the path we're on in terms of substantive progress and even on issues like we've talked about, not just the economic issues, but others going forward in the next couple of years, I really, really hope that you will be proved wrong. But I really enjoyed our discussion, David. Thank you so much for joining us. And I do encourage everyone to read the book, because whether you agree or not, it's important for people to be aware of arguments that are out there. Thanks so much. Coming up, is our democracy rigged, and what can we do about it? A look ahead to next week's Unrig the System Summit, where I'll be joining an all-star group of speakers with the goal of fixing American politics. That's next. Welcome back after that heated debate. What can we do about the rigged political system? My next guest has been working for many years on that problem, and he's organised a summit in New Orleans next week, bringing together celebrities, politicians and campaigners from all sides to tackle the problem head on. We'll be there next week to bring you exclusive coverage, but joining me now is the director of Represent.us, Josh Silver. Hey Josh, good to see you.
Thanks, Steve.
So tell me about this summit. I'm going to be there, but you know, what can I expect? What can Teslin expect, who I think is also going to be there next week? What's the plan?
So here's the thing. Most of your viewers understand that the political system is rigged. The way that candidates run for office, the way that voters vote, the way that politicians govern once they're in office is fundamentally broken because the laws that govern the American political system are broken. So we're going to be gathering in New Orleans at Tulane University this coming weekend with about 1,000 or so people from across the country who are rolling up their sleeves saying, Republicans aren't going to save us, Democrats aren't going to save us, politicians aren't going to save us, we the people are going to have to save us, and change the laws all across the country at the city level, at the county level, and at the state level that will fix this problem. And that is how we end polarization, it's how we end gridlock, it's how we see the issues we actually care about advancing, it's how we have more choices, how we break the two-party Republican-Democrat duopoly, and how we actually make America great again.
So Josh, we have hardly any time, but just in terms of the law, what is the focus? What's the most important laws to change?
Well, things like gerrymandering. 86% of U.S. House races aren't even competitive. So you have a shoo-in, nobody can compete, you can't get alternative candidates in. Remember, almost 50% of Americans are independents. Only 25% are Republicans and 27% are Democrats. We're going to work on new voting systems that exist around the world, but not in the United States, that actually make it so that third party and other kind of candidates, independents, can run and win without being spoilers. We're going to look at automatic voter registration. We're going to look at campaign finance reform so that you can't auction off politicians and policies. We're going to rework democracy from the ground up. It's happening this weekend.